Welcome to Running Physiology by Callum, which is myself. This is just an audio slash slide recording that we're gonna put up on for those who have missed the Wednesday talk, and if you guys felt like you missed out and you want to see what we're on about, this is it. All right. So what we will discuss. So we're going to go through some terms that you may or may not be familiar with. I suppose the most common ones that kind of get thrown around a little bit are VO2 max, aerobic threshold slash lactate threshold, running economy, a very, very brief energy system chat, discussing why we warm up, and also the role of strength training in and running. A bit of disclaimer, I've really tried to condense these and I haven't gone into too much physiological depth. A, because it would take me a lot longer, and B, I think it would be it wouldn't be appropriate to you guys as just runners, as in I see everyone here that I'm doing this for as people who are interested in running. And so as runners, what does this knowledge really mean? Like, do I have to know about every single enzyme that goes into an energy system? No, not really. So just before we start, it's not going to be a educational thing. It's more of just giving you a bit of a heads up and explaining probably a couple of things. Okay, so to begin with, VO2 max. So VO2 max is defined as the highest rate of oxygen that can be utilized by the body during high-end exercise. It is expressed as milliliters per kilos per minute. So if you hear somebody say, I've got a VO2 max of 50, that means they are utilizing a maximum of 50 milliliters of oxygen per their kilo per minute. So this is actually a relative term, because by relative we mean to the person, and that's why we've got the kilo in there. You can have absolute measures of VO2 max, which is expressed by liters per minute, but that doesn't really tell us too much, because I could have a fantastically high VO2 absolute of 10, but if I'm just a bigger person, relatively I could have a lower VO2 max than someone who's got a smaller absolute VO2 but significantly lighter. I slang term this, and now that I think about it, it's probably a bit misinforming, but I call it the aerobic ceiling. So I should probably change that to your oxygen consumption, or your maximal oxygen usage ceiling, because that's what it essentially is. It's basically saying how much oxygen can you maximally use. So this number obviously in the real world, due to if you lower, because when you talk about what's influencing what is limiting the VO2 max, we talk about your lungs, heart, and your blood. Heart, beta blockers, you're not going to have the correct amount of cardiac output. Your VO2 max would be affected. Lungs, if you are altitude, if you're very high, say top of Mount Everest, your VO2 max would be reduced. Conditions like COPD, you're going to have a very lower VO2 max, which actually has a very big impact on your energy systems and what's going on with the body. And blood, just simply anemic, so if you don't have the correct amount of red blood cells. Trainable adaptations gets a bit iffy, because if you look at what's the definition of what's limiting our VO2 max, the heart, the lungs, and the blood, the amount of training doesn't really influence the amount of red blood cells you've got flowing around the body. That generally stays pretty constant. You can get, unless you're doing things like blood doping. I'm not saying that you can't raise those levels, but it's not, you're kind of, what you get is what you got. And it's not really the blood, and the training adaptations isn't really from the blood. It's more about, your energy systems and mitochondria, which we'll get to. Lungs, same thing. Your stroke volume in your lungs and how much oxygen you can actually take in through the lungs is, what you're born with. People are born with, those set amount of receptors that take in oxygen, so you don't really improve that density. Heart does change. I would actually give you that, but with reducing your resting heart rate, which would in turn give you a higher heart rate range to work with oxygen, it sense there's a since I've condensed VO2, there's actually a lot of stages of what happens to give you your VO2 max stage. Even if you have a very good heart rate range, you might still be limited by how much availability of red blood cells you have. So you could have a resting heart rate of 30 and a max of 220. So you've got this fantastic range of cardiac output, but you still might be limited by the fact that no matter how good your lungs and your heart is, you've only got X amount of blood, and bang, that's how you get your VO2 max. In saying that, VO2 max is a very strong indicator for middle and long endurance performance. As in, if we use Lance Armstrong, he had a fantastically high VO2 max. So that means he had a lot of potential to really utilize oxygen. Whereas if I had a VO2 max of 30 compared to Lance's, which was 80, if he was only utilizing 50% of his aerobic capacity or his oxygen capacity, he would still be above me at a level of 40 versus 30. So, if you've got a significantly low VO2 max, you're probably not ever really going to go into Olympics, unfortunately. What does this mean to me? Well, first of all, being lighter helps. So it's no surprise that in endurance sports that requires, long duration, being lighter helps. And, it helps on your joints, helps on your muscle stresses, and it helps on reducing the oxygen demands, basically. Controversy about VO2 max. This, for you guys, actually probably doesn't really matter much, but for those who are a bit more academically involved and want to learn a bit more or want to do a bit of reading, look up central governor theory. But basically, a VO2 max is what happens is those limiting factors are what kind of puts a cap on how much oxygen we can use. The central governor theory believes that it's actually some other inhibitory thing, inhibitory process within the brain that caps it. I'm not 100% sure if it was more of a subconscious thing. So think about, regulatory processes in the brain that control heart rate and control blood pressure. You don't really consciously do work on that, but the conscious can push those around a little bit. So look into it. I admittedly can't tell you much about that at the moment, unfortunately. But yeah, changes in VO2 max hasn't always been seen to improve performance. As in, you can have a increase in VO2 max, but your performance stays steady. You can have improvement in VO2 max and have no changes in performance. And they've actually seen people with similar VO2 maxes having a big disparity in performance. So if this VO2 max is meant to be the best indicator, why is it that when people have the same level, they can perform differently? So this is where they've digged a little deeper, and there's these other attributes or other things that go on that actually attribute to endurance performance, one of them which is running economy. So running economy is expressed as plotting VO2 max versus running speeds on a graph, as in at this running speed I'm using this percentage of my VO2 max. So an example of having two people with a 30 milliliter per kilo per minute, but a person who can run at 4-minute pace and only use 20 milliliters per kilo per minute versus somebody who uses 29.9, the person who's got the better running economy would do much better over a race, and much more so at a longer race. So yeah, oxygen definition is oxygen uptake to run at a specific speed. It is limited / influenced by improved cardiovascular function. So obviously the VO2 max side of things influences this, but also it's the skeletal oxidative capacity. So the amount and performance of your mitochondria. They're the little cells in your muscles that basically work with ATP, which we will discuss a bit further on, and your running biomechanics. So basically that's when you think efficiency, that's what a lot of people classically think is in how am I running? Is it, very inefficient? Am I got a lot of lateral movement? Do I have very poor contact time? Is my cadence like 10, which is, unlikely, but extreme versions. Trainable. The pinpoint way in which you train running economy isn't very well documented in literature. Generally because it's very hard to do a double-blind control test on this, because it's pretty obvious if one group's running one group's not. And generally, if they've showed the difference between long running and interval running, a lot of the time the confounding factor is the fact that the people who are doing the long run end up running for longer or doing more duration. And that's what's really been seen as a bit of the linchpin that really helps with running economy. Is I've found that routine and long-term exposure to running are the things that really benefit running economy, as they found that people who had a greater history of running, the professionals obviously, and people who participated in longer events, therefore they did a lot of longer runs, generally had better running economy versus those who had just started or think running 3K every day versus going out there and running for a good whole hour. So what it means to me is that whilst there is conflicting evidence, you can still improve your running economy at the end of the day by just simply going for your long runs, try not to miss it, keep up that running. So that's the exposure to running. So it's, constant running is good. So don't feel like you're going to get running economy in 8 weeks. So, it will take time. Queuing helps is sure, because that kind of, I suppose, lets us know what we're doing. But a lot of it's just, the body having to develop those mitochondria density, you having to get a bit fitter. And, in the biomechanics, in a sense, that does come as well in time. So, these things don't really happen overnight. And this becomes very significant for performance the longer the race. So for those of you who are looking at the half marathons and the marathons, it's no surprise that every man and his dog who trains for those train for long runs. So that's a very good example of how running economy is very important, as in if you got a 400 meter runner, he will be super VO2 fit because he obviously does very high intensity exercise. He really is always up that top end of oxygen demand, so he's always pushing that VO2 barrier. But if you got him to verse someone who is more of a marathon runner, they could have similar VO2s, but the marathon runner will absolutely towel him up because that marathon runner has a lot more muscular endurance and running economy. So that's a very good example of that. All right, lactic threshold and aerobic threshold. So we discussed this as, we want to train at these paces, or we want to train at pushing this up, or, pushing the pace down at this level you can run at. So it's generally expressed, again, this is changes kind of vague, but I kind of accept that around that 85% max heart rate or 75% of your VO2. Definition is the exercise intensity where lactic acid begins to increase or starts to get out of hand. So lactic acid we will visit further down when we talk about energy systems, but it's a good indicator of where we kind of run and we swap over from an aerobic energy system to start tapping into that anaerobic or non-oxidative energy system. And pretty much the whole crux of all this training is trying to do is it's trying to improve your aerobic capacity so you can run faster but stay as aerobic as possible, because, which we will talk a bit about later on, that aerobic capacity is what makes you faster for longer, because you can only really rely on your anaerobic energy systems for not long at all. So trainable, very much so. By becoming more aerobically efficient, you can go faster before hitting that anaerobic point. So I could go one day, I'll be running along and I'll be very inefficient, and I'll be breathing, I'll be burning, and I'll be sweating, falling apart at 4-minute pace. Then if I train, I can run along very comfortably at that 4-minute pace. So that difference, if you're at that very high end, is pushing up that aerobic lactic threshold. So it's pushing that threshold before you start to accumulate lactic and become anaerobic further and further away from the pace that you originally have. And this is improved by the mitochondria is in the muscles, and the muscles becoming, and the energy system is becoming more efficient. So what does this mean to me? So with before how we said your VO2 max is your ceiling, as in your VO2 max is pretty much how much of your oxygen you can maximally play with, your lactic threshold can be termed as the percentage of the ceiling you can work out aerobically. So ideally, the higher the percentage of your VO2 max you can work aerobically, the better you'll be. Because just say I've got a maximum budget of $30, and if I can effectively use $29.9, I've only got, $0.1 wastage or, non-utilization. Whereas if I've got a budget of $30, but I'm only using $10, I've got $20 who's just sitting there. Like, you can really train this up. You can really start to utilize what you've got. And a lot of people, that's what really is the main adaptability, is that ability to really push your fitness and your aerobic capacity up, so you can be aerobic at faster paces. And this is another big one, which is a strong predictor for performance, especially in between people with similar VO2 max scores. So somebody could have 50 VO2, somebody else could have 50 VO2, but one person can work aerobically at, or their threshold's a lot higher, so they've got more aerobic room to work at versus Mr. B, who's just got a very low aerobic score. Cool. Questions were for the people who were there. So for you guys, you just can email me. You can drop me a message on Facebook. I understand that I can be a bit vague, or I may have said something wrong. Feel free to question me. I don't feel threatened. I like to, maybe you guys know something that I've said wrong. By all means, correct me. But all right, coming up is energy systems. So this is the part of this little talk where I heavily condense energy systems. So bear in mind that there's a lot more that goes on, and if I wanted to talk about exactly what goes on all these little energy systems, there's a million enzymes going on. There's a lot more, but for us, we're just trying to keep it a bit more condensed. So to begin with, all muscle contractions are run by ATP. It's a molecule called adenosine triphosphate. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that well. I haven't had to talk about what ATP actually means in years and years and years. As in, when I was writing this and I typed up ATP, I was like, oh, what does that actually mean? It's just a thing that no one ever really uses anymore, like, ITB. Nobody says your iliotibial band, everyone just says ITB. So ATP can stay as ATP. So the body has 3 energy systems that can work to develop ATP for muscle contractions. They are the phosphagen energy system, your glycolytic, and your oxidative. So all energy systems work together, or they kind of work simultaneously, but they work at a different percentage at different tasks. As in, one system will be working predominantly at one task, another energy system will be working predominantly at this task. So an example would that be heavy weight lifting immediately, or a full sprint, just walking along normally, running hard for a 10-kilometer, or playing a soccer game is a good one as well. All right, so phosphagen energy system. So that uses store ATP and creatine phosphate to supply muscle energy. It generally lasts around 10 seconds. It gives you 10 seconds maximal effort. So you've got 10 seconds to really you can hold your breath and sprint as hard as you can for 10 seconds, and your muscles keep going until you kind of hit that point, and you'll stop pretty quick. So fatigue's quite fast. You can train to hold more, but not really. So sprinters obviously would want to train to hold more of this. But for us as an endurance performance, or because we're all endurance athletes, it doesn't really mean much for us. But it's what can be called is when you kick in a race, or when you substantially lift your pace mid hard run. So just say you're running along and you're breathing very heavily and you're thinking, oh my God, I cannot go any quicker. I'm feeling absolutely pretty high end, your heart rate's 195 or whatever it is, or your near max heart rate. If you ran past a house and a dog jumped out of the bushes, you can still just bang, you can still go extra hard for roughly around that 10 seconds. So that's what's called a kick in a race. That's where if you're running to the end of the race and somebody's coming up on your shoulder, you look around and you go, oh, here comes someone, and I'm 10 meters away from the finishing line. You can just bang, you can kick, and you can go quicker. in running races, this is one of the questions that I got asked. It was, can you regenerate this energy system throughout a run? And the answer is yes. I'm not sure the actual percentage heart rate ratio of how long it takes, as in if I'm running at 50% max heart rate, I can probably, regenerate my phosphate and stored ATP through my other energy systems a lot quicker than if I was at absolute max heart rate. So what it means is that you can, with enough semi-recovery in a race, perform multiple kicks, if in a sense. So you can, at the start of the race, you might run really quick to get in front of all the slow people. There might be a guy with a pram in front of you, so you just, you sprint really fast around him. Then you sit back on your lactic threshold, you trot along, and then somebody comes up in your corner and you can bang, go again. So just when you think of this energy system, generally think 100-meter sprint performance. So it's pretty much Usain Bolt can run the entire 100 meters without taking a single breath if he wanted to. So what does this mean to me? I've pretty much talked about this before, but yeah, as before, endurance athlete, not much, just kick to start, finish, positional versus winning. And depending on your VO2 max work, you can theoretically have multiple bursts. That's, geez, I spelled that wrong. Doesn't matter. So that's what we're talking about for, whereas you can, have multiple little bursts of energy. I suppose if you're talking about it in racing again, it means that if you're neck and neck with someone and somebody sprints off and you can kind of stay near them again, or you can kind of keep up with them, you should be able to sprint, take them over, and they should be able to sprint up and keep up with you again. So for track athletes, that's talking about that a person can't kick twice. So that means that if you can stay with someone while they kick, you should be able to go again on them and they should be able to stay with you, which means you win. All right, glycolytic system. So this one's a bit of a complicated one. So this is the energy system that uses either your circulating blood glucose or stored glycogen in the muscles or liver to produce ATP. Glucose is basically sugar, and glycogen is basically stored glucose. It just changes the molecule changes what it looks like because it's been stored in a muscle because it can't stay the same. Annoyingly to understand, but this can happen with or without oxygen. So this is where we start to talk about lactic a bit. So this, along with the phosphagen energy systems, work together to get your body moving before you go into your oxidative. So what I mean by that is that, that's where you can go from 0 to sprinting. And then, when you finish sprinting, your heart rate rises, your breathing rises as well. And after that initial sprint, you can kind of slow down a little bit and keep trotting. So it's kind of like what can get us moving if we need to before our oxidative system has time to really catch up. So a byproduct of this energy system is lactic acid when glucose is broken down and oxidized. So this little line I've got here I think is a bit misleading. I probably should have said a byproduct of a non-oxygen. So when you see how it says it can happen without oxygen, so what happens is generally this glucose or glucagon is broken down in pyruvate, and then pyruvate does a whole bunch of other things, and a whole lot of other things happen before pyruvate, but pyruvate then eventually goes into ATP, into the muscle mitochondria, and you get muscle contractions. If you don't have enough oxygen because you're working too hard, or you're in a for whatever reason you're unfit, you're at top of Mount Everest, and you don't have enough oxygen for what you want, you'll still break down this pyruvate, but you'll get a lactic acid instead. So this lactic acid will start to pull more and more if you don't stop running at that intensity, which is without oxygen. But what happens is that you will find that along with lactic isn't the reason you kind of shut down. Lactic is a byproduct, but you get all these other associated things. Specifically, you get inhibited calcium release in the muscle. Calcium is needed as a nerve receptor to try and use for muscle contractions. So if you get inhibited calcium release, you can't get the signals for muscle contractions. You stop contracting muscles. and we will have to bring back our pace, because if you can't contract muscles, you can't move your legs, you're not going to go quick. So, but what happens if we lower our pace and we slow down a little bit? That circulating lactic can actually be converted back to pyruvate, back down through that oxidative glycolytic system. So that's where the traditional train of thought was that lactic is slowing me down. Lactic is the byproduct of oxidative stress, non-oxidative stress, and it's like that's the reason we stop. Now it's actually lactic is just a byproduct, and it's actually an energy system which we can use. Not energy system. It's a energy. It's fuel. It's a fuel that we can still use, but we just need to be. It's actually the other things that go all along when you're pooling lactic acid that actually makes us stop. It's not lactic acid itself. The feeling of lactic acid, though, is that's when you get the burning heavy legs. So what does this mean to me? All right, so it means when you run above aerobic demands for a while, eventually you're gonna stop and go back to working predominantly aerobic. Your non-oxidative glycolytic system will give you roughly 1.5 to 2 minutes of work. So that means you can sprint you'll sprint along 10 seconds, your phosphate will burn up and go away, and you can kind of keep the same intensity, keep going, and eventually after a couple of minute 30, 2 minutes, you'll tap out. You'll have to start slowing down. Improving your cardiovascular fitness means that you can go at a lower pace before this system has to kick in. So we're thinking, working on that lactic threshold, because we know if that's pretty much what that swapping over from that non-oxidative to oxidative glycolytic system. You're limited by your muscle glycogen. So, as it uses circulating glycogen and stored glycogen, in a aerobic to moderate to high aerobic bouts of activity, you will still be predominantly using that stored glycogen, as in the oxidative and your oxygen aerobic system / oxidative glycolytic system is predominantly what you use. You use a bit of fat, but generally at the higher heart rate, the fat energy system is a bit slow, so you'll be using this. So that's when, and you can get about 2 hours of this. 2 hours it takes before that stored muscle glycogen depletes, and that's when people hit the wall in the marathon after about 2 hours. The way to kind of counteract that is try and take simple carbohydrates as you run. So aerobic system, this uses the blood glucose, which we discussed before, muscle and liver glucose, which we used before, and your adipose and intramuscular fat. So the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain are the two processes associated with the aerobic system. The Krebs cycle is using the pyruvate formed in our oxidative glycolysis to convert into ATP. So that's the Krebs cycle, is the one you'll be using a lot when you're running at your above 50% max heart rate stuff. And you generally have, about 2 hours depending upon what percentage of heart rate you're running at. Obviously, if you're running at a lot higher, you're going to be probably using a mix of the aerobic, anaerobic, or you just be going through that stored glycogen a lot quicker. The electron transport chain, where we convert that broken down fats, is a massive fuel source, but it doesn't really work that well. So to have it working fast enough to supply our aerobic demands, you're generally looking at around working at that 50 to 60% max heart rate. So what this means, I suppose, in a bit more real terms, is that that if I told you to walk for as long as you can muscle contract for days, basically. You can almost walk non-stop for quite comfortably, I'd probably say at least a day. Whereas if I told you to jog, how much can you jog for? You're generally thinking about, an hour, 2 hours. And it's because of muscular fatigue notwithstanding. It's because of the two different energy systems. Fats, you got a lot of stored fat. I don't think anyone's going to outwalk their stored fat, whereas you can outrun your stored glycogen. So what does this mean to me? People who win races are generally working more aerobically than the other person. Simply put, if I can work at a lower heart rate and be 30, 40 seconds per kilometre quicker than you, I don't care how much you simply won't be able to beat the other person unless the other person has a very poor mindset and doesn't like to run hard, and he likes to basically take it very, very easy. If you guys are running at the exact same rating of exertion, the person who's more aerobically will win by a lot more. And if their running economy is similar, like that type of stuff. So you want to be aerobic at higher paces. So the way in which we improve this is through improving the determinants of endurance performance, as we discussed. So improving your lactic threshold, improving your, when I say lactic threshold, we're using improving our muscles and improving our aerobic energy systems and how they work, and mitochondrial density, which is the running economy. So that's, we're talking about, we want to be running for a long period of time, and we also want to be working at shorter periods of time, but higher heart rate, and a good mix of things. And I'll show you examples of what training your aerobic system looks like. But I call this one energy systems in action. So this is what's kind of roughly going on with our energy systems when we're running. So we start running. We imagine if we get up, we start running. So for the first couple of minutes, we're trying to start our oxidative energy system. That will be switching on. So it's not like you can run 2-3 minutes without breathing. Like you're starting to try and increase your heart rate, your breathing rate, and body temperature. So you're trying to start to shift more towards aerobic energy system. So imagine that it's like when you start running, it's 10% aerobic, 90% anaerobic. And as you run further and further, that will start to tip over. So you start going, 80, 10, 90, 10, 80, 20, bump, bump, bump. And you want to keep upping that aerobic energy system working. If the pace is too fast, so if you keep going for that 2 or 3 minutes and you still can't get aerobically and you're working very, very much anaerobically, accumulate lactic acid, you start to get inefficient muscle contractions, and you effectively slow down. And depending upon, this is what we discussed a little bit before, but we'll go over it again, but depending upon what intensity you begin with to use your glycogen, depending on how fast you're going, it depends on how much glycogen or fat you'll use. But generally, a lot of people in a race will be above 50% heart rate. 50% heart rate's quite low. That's literally like almost walking. And you have that 2 hour. So that's why fueling for a marathon is very important, because nobody's been able to run 2 hours for a marathon yet. You can store a bit more glycogen. So, you might be able to get to 2:10, 2 hours, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes. I have no idea. Or maybe even 3 hours. I'm actually not too sure of the exact numbers. But generally speaking, it's very, very smart of you to take things like those little gels, honey, anything to try and increase circulating blood sugar, because we know blood glucose can be used in that cycle. Examples of training aerobic energy systems. So 60 minutes at 70 to 75% max heart rate, 15 to 20 minutes at lactic threshold, and 5 by 3 minutes at 90 to 95% max heart rate, 3 minutes active recovery. So, don't know if you guys cast your minds back, I think you'll find that these three training modes are things that we've been doing ourselves. We did a lot more of these bottom two in our previous running, but that 60 minutes, we're trying to really get that working for us, because that's obviously 60 minutes of exposure at your aerobics energy system. So if we're going too hard, we know we're not working at that, that key 70-75% max heart rate. So 15 to 20 minutes at lactic threshold, 80 to 85. So that's those shorter, shorter duration, but kind of high. Then when you're talking about like these all-out ones, we want to at least hit 3 minutes, but you have a lot of time in between for your energy systems to kind of replenish that lost ATP you probably had if you're working a bit semi-anaerobic. All right, roles of warming up. Warming up adequately starts to get our aerobic system working. It takes 10 to 11 minutes to get your aerobic system working maximally. So the key word of that one is maximally. So when you start to if I went from sitting to running, my aerobic system, of course, is there. It's working. It's not like it's not working. But maximally is the key. So that's why a lot of VO2 maxes they say needs to go for at least 10 to 11 minutes because that's when the aerobic system's at full function, basically, full efficiency. So that might be a better way of saying it, that warming up gives our body time for our aerobic system to be working at 100% efficiency, or, roughly. So that means that when we go to run very, very fast at our race pace, we're not, trying to run whilst being more anaerobic, because that means if you try to stay at a pace that you're going to run at, chances are you might go, oh God, the first couple of kilometers, I burn out. I just start to accumulate lactic acid. The first K was all right, but after that, around that 800 meter mark, oh yeah, I was really starting to accumulate lactic acid. I can't keep this pace up. If you warm up properly, that shouldn't be the case, theoretically. For those of you who are not comfortable, who are experienced in doing interval training, you'll find if you don't do any warming up, and I had you doing 5 lots of, as before we showed those 5 lots of those 3-minute paces at 95 to 100% max heart rate. If you didn't warm up and I got you to do 5 of those, your first one would feel terrible, your second one would feel easier, and your third one would probably feel easier again. And then just because you've got related fatigue, you probably start to feel like, oh man, I'm starting to die at this 4th and 5th. But the second one will feel much better, and that's because you've really gotten yourself warmed up, you've gotten warmer, you've increased heart rate, you've increased breathing, and you've actually got your aerobic system working properly. And that's simply because, when you start running, your heart rate can't jump from resting rate of 70 to like 180, just like that, because we go into, that's like atrial fibrillation, and the same thing with your breathing. You don't just increase your respiratory rate to calm breathing to like really fast breathing. That's basically hyperventilating. And also warming up helps move the muscles around, and it's related to a lower incidence of injury. All right, if you guys are still with me, we're going to talk about strength training. So strength training has been linked to improve running economy, which is, we go back up there and we look, if we can remember what running economy it was cardiovascular, it was skeletal oxidative, and it had biomechanics. So strength training can help our biomechanics. Strength training does not equal building bulk muscle. So that equals is my version of does not equal. And the reason for this is, strength training is expressed as a weight of 80 to 85% 1RM, short repetition range, and long rest period. So what this means is that if you go into a gym, you see guys, generally muscular or not, doesn't really matter, but everyone will be at the gym, they'll be lifting until they can't lift no more. They'll throw the weights down, might trot around for a bit, but then they'll come back and they'll lift to failure, lift to failure. That style of training will give you an increase in strength, but it is not classically strength training. That's more building bulk muscle, because you're basically tearing the muscle, eliciting a big muscle repair response, so you build more muscle. Strength adaptations doesn't always mean bigger muscles. Strength also consists of a number of neuromuscular adaptations. They are synchronization of muscle fibers, recruitment and firing rate of the muscle fibers. So it essentially means that when, one of the examples I used Wednesday afternoon was if I go to pick up a very, very, very heavy weight, and you know how it takes you a long time to really kind of get it up? Like if I'm trying to bicep curl, I pick something up and I struggle for a bit, then I finally start getting it up. One of the things that's happening in the body is that I go to grab it and I'll go to pull the bicep and try to do a bicep curl. The body doesn't really know how heavy it is, so the body goes, all right, Callum, I'm gonna recruit about 40% of your muscle fibers here, because we don't want to use 100% because I don't want to lift this barbell up and smack my shoulder or punch myself in the face, because you want controlled movements. So I'll go pick it up and I'll go to fire my muscle fibers, and I get all these signals and I go, all right, crap, 40% isn't enough muscle fibers to lift this. All right, I'm going to use 50. Oh, still not enough. I'll use 60% muscle fibers. So 60% muscle fibers, yeah, okay, it's coming up. But the problem is those 40% muscle fibers have been working that entire time before the 60% got utilized. So those 40% were under fatigue conditions for longer. So that's like where you get better utilization of the muscle fibers you have. So if you do weight strength training correctly, you can really focus on those neuromuscular adaptations without having to really increase your cross-sectional muscle fiber size, as in you don't really need to increase the diameter of your muscle fibers. And another thing it does, it also reduces your inhibitory functions, as in it's very rare, unless in extreme situations, that someone can contract their muscle fibers 100%, as in 100% muscle utilization, especially for those untrained. You do hear those extreme situations where, you know, there's that story about that mother lifting the car off her baby. So, you know, that's where the conscious theoretically may be able to, you know, take over the subconscious systems a bit. You know, you can, in those do or die situations, those inhibitory functions that kind of stop those muscle contractions might get a bit lifted. So this lady, you know, why she can't ever probably do it again unless in those extreme situations, she was able to, you know, pick this car off an inch off the ground and get a kid out underneath the car. So, you know, doing strength training will reduce those as your muscles become stronger and the body knows it's not going to hurt itself, basically. All right, so that's all we've had. That's all we went through. If you guys are still here, I commend you, because it's a bit of a long chat. Yeah, as before, definitely any feedback. If there's anything you want me to clarify, or if you even want to hear it again, because you know this talk might have been a bit all over the shop, which you know, potentially could be. But yeah, that's what I feel all you guys really need to know as runners. So yeah, I hope that was informative and not too confusing, and thank you for listening.